I remember that night as if it were yesterday. I can't get that horrifying picture out of my head, which left an imprint on my memory, even though many years have passed. I am 20 now, and I have a terrible fear of paralyzed people. This story happened back in my high school days. Exams were coming up, so I was preparing for them every day, which made me very tired and went to bed without waiting for my parents to come home from work. My grandmother lived with us. She had suffered from Parkinson's for many years, so I looked after her and took care of her. One day when I was in school, my mother called me. Usually, teachers forbid us to pick up the phone during class, but the rule didn't work for me. The whole class knew about my grandmother's bad condition. I walked out of the classroom and immediately picked up the phone. On the other end of the line was my mother's crying voice. She said that my grandmother had a stroke and had been taken by ambulance to the hospital. After explaining the situation to the teacher, I was released from class. After packing my backpack, I went out on the porch of the school, waiting for my dad to pick me up in the car. All the way to the hospital, I prayed to God that my grandmother was alive. I was replaying the hundreds of words I want to say to her. When we arrived at the hospital, we met my mother, who was standing with the doctor at the door of the room where my grandmother lay. With a cold, stone face, the doctor recounted the grandma's condition. She is alive, however, she will never move or speak again. For a moment I caught myself thinking that it was not the first time a doctor had said such a diagnosis. We were glad that Grandma was alive, but her condition was despairing. A week later, Grandma was discharged from the hospital and was able to come home to us. Mom quit her job to look after her, providing for the family fell entirely on Dad's shoulders. I imagined my first meeting with my grandmother differently. When I came home from school, the first thing I did was run to her room. The week of waiting for the long-awaited meeting was tearing me up inside. Slowly opening the door, I saw a sitting, paralyzed, mooning body with a twist face. It got creepy. My mother told me that Grandma mood when she was thirsty or hungry or needed to pee is the only sign she can make until we help her regain her speech. That at least was Mom's hope. It was hard to sleep at night. Outside my room, I could hear Grandma's constant mooing and my mother's mumbling as they taught her how to talk again. So the days went by and then the weeks. My grandmother kept mooing, but my mother never gave up hope of her recovery. One day my parents were invited by friends to a wedding ceremony. Mom didn't want to leave me alone with Grandma, thinking that I might not be able to cope with taking care of her. However, I was able to change my mother's mind, and my parents went out of town for an overnight stay. Before they left, they fed Grandma and put her to bed, leaving me with a sheet of instructions for the next day so I wouldn't forget anything. The night was as quiet as ever. I lay in bed and started at the ceiling trying to sleep. I had never been alone in a lonely apartment with a paralyzed grandmother before. More and more thoughts entered my head about how she was not lying in the next room. Was she awake or still asleep? Gradually from the thoughts, I began to drift off to sleep. I don't remember why, but close to 3 o'clock in the morning, I opened my eyes. My grandmother's silhouette was standing at the window, and her gaze seemed to be fixed on me. A cold sweat ran down my forehead. In fright, I sharply reached for the desk lamp, switched to turn on the light. But when I lit the room and looked toward the window, there was no one there. I thought My heart was going to jump out of my chest. I was just imagining things. Suddenly, I heard a sluggish moaning from the next room. Was Grandma awake? I got out of bed and slowly staggered toward her room. The moaning grew louder and rougher until it turned into a wild, heartbreaking hum. My grandmother had never made a sound like that before. I was scared out of my wits. I opened the room a little. What I saw made my heart race and my hands tremble with terror. Grandmother was lying on the bed, convulsing violently, as if someone unseen had given her an electric shock. The pupils of her eyes glowed bright white, and a black liquid oozed from her mouth. The moaning turned into the rumble of a wild beast. I stood staring through the ajar doorway in a panic as my grandmother suddenly jumped up from the bed. Abruptly, as if her body had never been paralyzed, she took a step toward the door, which made me slam it shut in fright. I didn't know what to do in this situation. Frightened, I ran into my room, opened the closet, swept things on the floor, making space, and climbed inside, locking the door behind me. I was sure it wasn't my grandmother in front of me anymore. It was the demon that had possessed her mind. The wild humming that my grandmother was making was coming toward me. It seemed as if she was already standing next to the closet, with only one door separating us. Suddenly, there was a dead silence in the room. Was she there? Or maybe she's gone? What if the demon had left her body and my grandmother was lying unconscious on the floor? Could she have gone silent to make it look like she wasn't in the room? Should I go out or stay in the closet? All these questions in my head only served to inflame the situation. A sense of shame and a sense of fear fought within me. I don't know how long I sat in the closet until I fell asleep. In the morning, my mom and dad woke me up on my return home. They found me in the closet thanks to things scattered on the floor. I sat there all night. When asked, "Where's Grandma?" Dad looked at me in surprise. She was still lying paralyzed on her bed. It was as if last night had never happened. Trying to explain my sleeping in the closet to my parents, I told them the story of the night, about my grandmother's strange condition and the fact that she had walked around the apartment at night. But they didn't believe me, recommending only that I spend less time at the computer. A lot of time had passed since then. Grandma is no longer alive with us, but I still remember every detail of that night as if it happened yesterday. If you like scary stories, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to not miss new videos.